Hello and shalom, everybody. My name is Julia Jassy, and you are listening to Nice Jewish Girls, brought to you by Unpacked, a division of Open Door Media. On today's episode, we are talking with tech journalist Nellie Bowles. Nellie is as passionate a Jew as you're ever going to meet. She truly loves her faith, her community, her peoplehood, all of it. And she isn't afraid to talk about it and write about it. What makes Nellie so connected to her Judaism is that, well, she chose to be a part of it. Nellie is a Jew by choice, a woman who was so inspired by the religion that she chose to convert to it. Her story is as powerful as it is really beautiful. So many people, myself included, who were born into Judaism have taken it for granted in ways that Nellie has learned to value it. And she's documented this experience through her blog, Chosen by Choice, which shares the stories of converts with stories similar to hers and different from hers, all bound together by a love they chose to find in Judaism. On today's episode, I wanted to talk to Nellie about her experience finding Judaism and why she chose to write about it. I want to ask how a tech journalist from the New York Times finds inspiration from a blog on Jewish conversions. But really, I just want to hear Nellie's story, because it truly is one worth celebrating. I am so excited for you guys to meet her. Let's do this thing. Nellie Bowles is a former New York Times reporter on tech and internet culture. Before writing for The Times, she's written for California Sunday, The Guardian, Recode, and the San Francisco Chronicle, as well as acting as a correspondent for Vice News Tonight. Prior to journalism, Nellie graduated from Columbia University and was a 2011-2012 Fulbright Fellow to Swaziland. Nellie, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's such a pleasure to be here and chatting with you.
Amazing. Let's get right into it. So can we start off by telling us a little bit about where you're from?
Yeah. So I'm from San Francisco, California, born and raised. My family's been in California for a long time, and now I am calling in from Los Angeles, California, where I have managed to move my new wife, and we are living in central LA.
Amazing. And you were not raised Jewish. How was your family background growing up?
I was raised, I would say, a mix of Episcopalian and a little bit of Greek Orthodox from my mom. And we would go to the church 2 blocks down from my house growing up. We went every Sunday, more or less. And I would say I was raised in a fairly religious home. My mom's gotten actually more religious as I've gotten older, but I haven't obviously been a child in the house.
Yeah.
I come to Judaism as someone who likes religion already.
For sure. And I think that's actually something that makes a lot of sense. I think that you had an appreciation for it growing up that kind of drew you to having a curiosity for Judaism. And what drove that curiosity? What made you consider converting and becoming a part of the tribe?
Well, for me, religion was always church was like a third space, right? It was a space that wasn't school, it wasn't work, it wasn't my friends or family. It was like something separate from that. And at its most basic, it's just like a time every week where you go and like think about life and think about like, how you're living. Are you doing a good job that week? Could you do better? I liked having that in my life, and I need to have that in my life. And I think humans need to have that in their lives. And so,
for sure.
So I, as I'd gotten older, had stopped going to church, stopped being really involved. I had trouble with a lot of the, this is going to sound crazy, but like some of the mystical aspects of it. Like I had trouble, like Christianity's really, it's a belief, right? Like you have to believe. You have to believe in the magic. You have to believe in the resurrection. And when you get older and you start to really think about it, and if you're like a skeptical person like me, that's really hard. Yeah. And I couldn't believe. And that was really hard for me. And for years, I just lived kind of without religion and was like, it's fine. I sort of made peace with like that not really being part of my life. And then about 4 years ago, I met this woman who is Jewish and for whom being Jewish is really important to her. And so I started by just kind of thinking, okay, well, she's really into Judaism. She writes about Judaism. I know nothing about Judaism. So 4 years ago or whatever, I was like, I'll just take a 101. Like there's all these 101 classes at Reform shuls, And I'll take one of these classes. It's like 6 months every Thursday night, and I'll learn about this thing that's really interesting, and I'll impress this girl. And
it's very romantic.
I realize I'm like, well, you do what you got to do.
The hopeless romantic in me is just like failing right now for this story.
Yeah, but also I wanted to learn. Yeah. You want to learn about what your partner's into.
Yeah, of course.
And so that's how it started. And I'm just a curious person, so it was fun. Like the idea of just like learning about something new every week was just fun. Like you're in college still, so it's like you learn all the time. But when you get older, like you're not taking classes anymore. You're not necessarily learning unless you like put yourself in situations to do so.
For sure.
Sorry, I realize I'm just rambling, but I can just keep rambling.
I'm loving the story. Please keep rambling. That's why we have you here. You want to hear the rambles, all of it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I take the 101. I sign up with the Kitchen, which is a like very cool reconstructionist. Ferris says to use the term neo-Hasidic. It's like this just very cool new shul in San Francisco with a lot of young people, a lot of energy, and run by this woman named Noah Kushner, who's a brilliant rabbi. And I take this 101 class, and I just love it. I love learning about the rituals of Judaism. I love learning about just the life cycle of it, how you're supposed to structure your week, how you're supposed to structure your year, and how it kind of holds a life. And it just pretty quickly clicked for me. And I liked that it was based on the same, it was all the same stories and traditions that I'd grown up with in a lot of ways, but based in a kind of more like rational, lived world. A world of like debate and curiosity and questioning rather than belief. And so that really clicked for me. And like, you can be an agnostic Jew. You can't be like you can't be an atheist evangelical Christian. It just, that doesn't work because it's a belief. It's not a tribe. Yeah. And so I just liked it right away. And then after that was done, I kept meeting with my rabbi, and I took years and years, and I actually just dunked in the mikveh like 3 days ago.
Oh my God! Well, mazel tov.
Thank you.
That's incredible.
So, anyways, you asked me a question. I'm too excited about this all right now.
No, and I mean, I think that it's so interesting to listen to you talk about this because I come from a totally different background than you, but your story is something that I can very much understand, and your experience something that I understand too. I mean, this emphasis on debate. I remember being in elementary school and going to Hebrew school, and we'd be reading prayers and debating what the meaning of them was. And here we are, 8-year-old kids sitting in a room with a teacher saying, hey, what do you think? Like, let's talk about the Shema. Let's unpack this. And I remember being like, I am 8. I don't know any of this. But we were encouraged from a really, really young age to just always ask questions, always be debating, always be talking.
It's amazing. And it's a real difference between the cultures. And it's just such a beautiful part of Judaism. And
I think we take that for granted when we don't understand that that's not a universal experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also interesting that you're talking about like feeling like you were missing something in your life. I think that experience of having moments of questioning where you stand is something that we can all relate to, even if you were born Jewish, not understanding what your place in Judaism is, not understanding where you're going with it. I've been there. So I think that your experience coming into Judaism was a very Jewish experience, to say the very least.
A lot of people actually in the 101 were Jewish, and it was really interesting. It was a mix of like fiancés and people who were born Jewish but didn't practice at all and knew nothing about it, like the children of Soviet Jews. And it was a really interesting mix. It was like maybe 20, 25 people. But it wasn't all people trying to convert, which was surprised me. And I didn't understand that at first. And then as I've learned more, I've learned, the history of the Soviet Union, for example.
No, absolutely. I distinctly remember being in shul when I was a very young kid, and one of my Hebrew school classmates' mother had converted to Judaism, and I remember I was very young and I took my Judaism very much for granted. I didn't really understand the value of it. I remember her standing in the shul and crying, talking about her experience of coming into Judaism and finding the strength in it. And it took me a really long time to gain that level of appreciation for it, choosing to be a part of something that I think a lot of us don't understand the power of, is such a meaningful process.
Yeah, it's any newcomer. Like when someone, it's like tourists in San Francisco always remind me of how beautiful San Francisco is, right? Like someone who just moves to the city and is like, oh my God, Golden Gate Park. And I'm like, yeah, Golden Gate Park. That is pretty nice. And I feel like I'm doing that at a lot of Shabbat dinners right now. I'm
Absolutely.
like, guys, this is incredible.
I hope that you're liking all the matzo ball soup you can get, because
I actually do. I struggle with some of the Ashkenazi traditional food. I'm going to be honest with you, but the matzo ball soup I love. Gefilte fish. No.
No way.
Guys.
But that's what I think is so powerful about Chosen by Choice and your blog and your experience of being this super accomplished journalist who's writing about your experience coming into Judaism, because it's hard to hear your story right now and talk to you right now and not feel, oh yeah, like being Jewish is awesome. What she's saying is so true, and not be inspired by that.
Thank you. That's very, very sweet. So I started the blog.
I want to hear about this.
At the start of COVID, and I basically was feeling like here I had been learning about Judaism for a couple of years, and all of a sudden I was going to have to be alone with a Zoom shul trying to like get deeper into this. And the thing that I love so much about Judaism, one of the things I love so much about Judaism is that it requires people, that it requires community, like physical community. You have to have enough people for a minyan. You have to physically show up in Judaism in a lot of ways. And that was such a magical, amazing part of it. And so for me, doing the Zoom shul and doing the Zoom classes, and it was really like hard, and just felt like I was getting like unplugged in a bit from this thing I was learning about. And so I started the blog as like a weekly challenge for myself to just post once a week, either an essay that I wrote or an essay that someone else who was choosing Judaism or had chosen Judaism, and posting it every Thursday night was really helpful, like on a personal level, just in terms of like keeping myself pushing forward and learning new things and thinking about new elements of converting that I hadn't thought about. And so, that's how the blog started. And it sort of saw me through COVID, and what became like my friend through COVID. And I, now I'm doing it like once a month or something, because the world's coming back, and I've been going to shul in person. And so I feel the need for it a little less, but I still love doing it. And it's brought a lot to my life. And the stories of other converts have been the best.
Yeah. So can you tell us a bit about those? In reading these experiences of other people who have converted, other people who have chosen to be Jewish by choice like you, have you found that there are lots of stories similar to yours, different from yours? What were some of the pieces? So different. Yeah. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Oh, they're just the most touching, beautiful stories. I should have pulled some that I could read right now. The submissions I've gotten, it's from all over the country, different people who chose to be Jewish. And a lot of them are people who maybe, like, one of my favorites was a guy who married a Jewish woman. They raised their kids Jewish. He was really involved with the shul, but he just never converted. And, finally in his, I want to say like late 50s, decides to just go for it. And finishes up a 101 and converts. And just everyone comes to it differently. But what I really wanted to highlight with the blog was like both the differences in the stories, but also the common thread of the things that draw people to Judaism and to this tribe, to this ancient tribe.
Yeah, of course.
And I think, by showing young people who are getting married and older folks who have already raised a Jewish family but just weren't Jewish.
Yeah.
I've been trying to, the differences and the similarities.
What are some of those similarities? What are the common threads that you see people being drawn to Judaism by?
I would say a huge part of it is the ancient tribe vibes, as the kids say.
Love the ancient tribe vibes.
Like, I think, like, okay, for myself, I kind of visualize my conversion in part as like, there's an ancient tribe walking across the desert, and I'm like, hey guys, hey, can I like walk with you? And
I love that.
Like, and I think a lot of people in our, and this is sort of cliche to say, but in our like increasingly fractured, religionless, community-less world, look at Judaism and look at the rules and the guidelines that it gives to a life and say, I need that.
Yeah.
I think, there's all these new stats, right, about how modern Americans have so few close friends, and especially American men have so few close friends, whereas like 20 years ago, they had a lot more, and the kind of like march towards loneliness that our culture is in, and Judaism is a rejection of that. And so I would say that a common thread through all these really different stories and really different reasons for conversion, but a common thread is just that insistence on community.
Yeah, and I mean, you've explained before how outside of this incredible work, you are a journalist for the New York Times. So definitely nothing to sneeze at. You're pretty impressive in all areas.
I've been on book leave for a few months, and now I'm technically coming off book leave, but Barry gives me 6 weeks.
And you've spoken about how this conversion process and hearing stories and meeting people has given you a drive to be more empathy-driven in your reporting. Where does that come from? How come you feel like this connection to this new tribe brings you to more empathy and something has nothing to do with Judaism?
Yeah. So the concept of Lashon Hara really, really has stuck with me. I am a reporter who sometimes, like, I do stories that upset people, and sometimes I do stories about horrible things that are really depressing and that should upset people. And sometimes there are good guys in a story, and sometimes there are jackasses in a story. And I think wrestling with Lashon Hara and wrestling with, like, when is it necessary to speak ill? When is it necessary to do that kind of work has really it just took me on a whole little mental journey in myself of like reflecting and trying to understand, what was driving me and why, and whether sometimes I was driven more by the desire for attention and the sort of pleasure of conflict, or if I was driven by nobler things. And I think often I was driven by the pleasure of conflict and the desire for attention. And I think of mostly when I was like a younger reporter. And I was kind of just willing to like be a little more callous and a little more careless. And in part, this is Lashon Hara and converting and becoming Jewish. And in part, this is, I think, just getting older and becoming, I think as people get older, they become more empathetic and softer in a lot of ways, which makes them boring, but which makes them maybe nicer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's boring. I think that's so interesting. You write about tech and internet culture. And I don't think you typically think about empathy when you think about tech. You think about something kind of cold and hard and very much male-dominated. But here you come into this world and you're breaking glass ceilings, but you're doing it in a way that is kind of unprecedented. I mean, I don't really
come
think
on,
that
come on. There's lots of good lady tech reporters.
What I mean unprecedented is I mean the way that you're viewing it. Like, I don't think that you think, how can I write about tech culture in a way that is empathetic. I don't think many people think about tech culture that way. And that's just a really interesting angle.
Well, the story of technology is the story of people right now.
Yeah.
And I think for a long time, it was told as like either a gadgetry story or then a money story.
Yeah.
And then it evolved into a power story.
Yeah.
With the big tech and the new oligarchs and all that. And now I think, and for me, how I see it is it's a human story. It's a story about how us, these like soft, fleshy little animals, are being changed by technology, by these glass screens. And so I see it as like a human story. And I think to try to understand how tech is changing us does require empathy and does require like a lot of empathy. I mean, just think about like this year in remote learning and kids. The only way to understand how that's going to change children and what long-term impacts that's going to have is to like really try to like feel in your heart like the humanness of it and like the humanness of like a 5-year-old who looks at a screen all day and whose teachers are masked and who like I think it's like an empathy story now actually.
That's actually exactly what I was thinking. I mean, I'm definitely not the most knowledgeable tech person, but I'm a very big education equality person, like education, just all sorts of different things when it comes to children and their access to education and accessibility. And I think a big question with tech recently, especially during the pandemic, is access to it. And how, yes, we talk about tech in terms of kind of like an oligarchical view, but it actually is becoming a part of the everyday lives of every person, such that access to it is access to education. And I think that the story around tech is changing as people are being changed by this extenuating circumstance in the pandemic.
Yeah, and like I wrote an essay a couple of years ago that I want to like update because I keep thinking about it, but it's like the thesis was basically that human contact is a luxury good. And so like the poor will be educated on screens. They will be given diagnoses from doctors on screens. The only ones who are going to get in, this would be my prediction if I had to place bets, that the people who are going to get human teachers are going to be, it's going to be like a luxury good. It's going to be the rich. And otherwise, for the middle class, for the poor, for even the upper middle class, it'll be Zoom school. And I think we're seeing that now. For me, I don't like that. My instinct is I'm wary. I think I think it's inevitable, and I think we're kind of off topic with all this, but it's inevitable, and you can do good versions and bad versions. But like, you know, if I had to choose between, if God willing, I have a kid one day, I'd much rather them be taught by a human than by a screen.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even think that this is off topic. I think this connects exactly to what we've been talking about this whole time, to what drew you to Judaism in the first place. This idea of having a connection that transcends circumstance, that even when we're in a pandemic, even when we can't be next to each other, finding a way to connect and to have meaningful connections within those to not just connect, but to connect meaningfully. And it's kind
Completely.
It's interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting that you found a way to bring that into your personal spiritual life and also into your professional life, that you wouldn't really expect to have that view of journalism, of tech and journalism. But that transcending idea of connection is really just central to all of the work that you're doing.
I mean, Judaism it's given me so much. I just feel really grateful. And it's a really good program. It's a really good program. Like, guess what? Like, a little tradition is nice, is basically what I've learned. And it's like, you know, I obviously live in a very modern way. I'm married to a woman. Like, I'm not living an ultra traditional life by any means. But I think that there is a lot of wisdom in traditions, and that they answer questions that we've forgotten. And so when you get rid of a tradition, that's great, but you're going to be confronted with a whole lot of questions that you've got to answer. And for me, a big part of converting has been like leaning into the idea that maybe I'm not going to be able to think of better traditions and like a better way to structure a life than 6 days of work and 25 hours of rest. Maybe that's a really good way to structure a week. And maybe actually someone had already figured that out and I didn't need to figure that out. And like, maybe there are other things that like the Jewish people over millennia have figured out that I don't need to like invent in this one lifetime. And so a big part of the last few years has been kind of like realizing that. And like, it requires being a little like humble and a little, less full of yourself and less sure of yourself and less sure that like your mind can figure out in this lifetime all the things it needs to figure out.
I think that's so interesting. And I think it's so interesting the point that you brought up about this conflict of living a modern life and also having tradition. And I think that that's kind of the ultimate experience and the ultimate question and tension of so many people, millennial, Gen Z, Jews right now in particular. I mean, people in general, but I think that's like an innately Jewish experience that we have this really ancient religion, but this ancient religion that's adapted a lot too, because first we were, we were in ancient, Judea, and then we were in shtetls, and then we kind of found our own country all of a sudden, and we've also been in diaspora, and just this constant shifting landscape and being able to survive in it. And that's happening again now, and people are doing it in ways that are super meaningful, and your experience is a part of that.
Well, it feels like it. It's just been great. I feel like I'm like, I really am the like person who just moved to San Francisco. I'm like, this is beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a great program. I
love that way that you worded that.
my Jewish friends, I guess, my God, I can say I'm Jewish now. I can't believe I finally dunked.
Amazing.
My friends make fun of me for wanting to be like an evangelical Jew, and I'm like, guys, this is an incredible program. Like, you gotta talk it up. You gotta spread this. Like, people need to know. That
really
doesn't
funny.
usually go over so well, though.
Oh my God, no! But I think that enthusiasm, like, is so important to embrace.
Well, thank you. I think during the Beit Din, the rabbis were asking me like hard questions, actually, and it was interesting because I'd already kind of been quizzed by my rabbi about prayers and this and that. Like I sort of like had, she'd been coaching me for years, and so it wasn't like a quiz on content because she like knew the content I knew and the content I didn't, and but they were asking me because I've been the good parts are really easy to see and really like I'm just like high on it, but the rabbis were asking me like, how will I reckon with the legacy of the Holocaust? Like, how will I, as this person who grew up in like nice San Francisco, like Episcopalian community, like get my head around joining a people who have been persecuted and who have suffered and who have had to like suffer for this faith that I'm coming to in this like delighted, like happy-go-lucky way. And I wish I had like a quick way to sum it up because I was dumbfounded by the question and it was hard. Yeah. The hardest part has been reckoning with the struggle of the history.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I come from a family, my dad's side, came over from Poland and Russia and like all over Eastern Europe just before the Holocaust. My mom's side were Israeli refugees from Yemen, Iraq, Spain. So definitely like I don't have a good answer to that question. And I like come from a family that has a lot of that in their background. And I don't know. I think that's just the fact that you grapple with that question is a very Jewish experience. How do you explain that to your family one day? Like, how do you come to terms with it? I'm 20 years old and I still don't really know how to come to terms with it.
You're 20 years old. You're a baby. You're like, I'm 20 years old and I still haven't. Oh God, I'm a grizzled 33.
Back in my youth.
Back in your youth. Yeah.
But I guess that really brings me to like the ultimate question of the podcast, and our last question, unfortunately. But you come from it with a totally different perspective than most people do, and I think that perspective is important. And what advice would you want to give to someone who is maybe coming into it from the same background as you, or maybe was raised Jewish and is hearing how you're speaking about it and seeing the way that you value it and is inspired? How would you want them to navigate the world now as you have become this Jewish woman a couple of days ago, which is amazing, having this fresh perspective? What advice would you want to give to anybody, I mean, particularly young women, but really anyone listening to this podcast about navigating the world as a Jewish woman?
Oy. Asking me to advise young Jewish women how to. I'm a Jewish woman as of 3 days ago.
Well, I mean, I guess you are a young Jewish woman. You're a newly jumped one.
I would just say to not take it for granted or be embarrassed about it or be shy about it. Like, Judaism is an amazing tribe, an amazing religion, an amazing history. It's something to just be really proud of and proud about. And it offers a hell of a lot. And life is lonely and stressful and unstructured, and Judaism has a lot of answers for that. And so I would just say to stay open to that and to take after you who's inspired so many, you who inspires me, you who are in the belly of the beast of a culture that makes it so hard to be proud and makes it so hard to be proud of your history and proud of the traditions of Judaism, and you're fighting for that pride, and it's so inspiring on my end as a newcomer to watch the work that you and your community are doing. I'm so inspired by it.
Likewise. I mean, I think it's so interesting because I listen to you speak and I get so much perspective. I feel like I got a lot out of this conversation just as the person hosting the interview. I feel like I listen to your perspective, and I think that you forget that sometimes when you grow up with it. I think it's interesting that we both come from different backgrounds and are mutually inspired by each other. I think that's something that's so powerful about why we did this podcast in the first place. We want to have that. Yeah.
You got to come to LA and hang out. You got to come.
Yeah, I would love that.
We're setting up the house. It's going to be great. and we can do a redux of the podcast IRL.
I would love that. I would 100% love to do that. Oh my gosh. Well, Nellie, it's been wonderful. And I'd love to have this conversation again because you're incredible. Thank you for taking the time.
You guys are doing the really hard work right now.
Thank you.
It's not so hard for me to be doing this. And I mostly have just gotten all positive feedback about the blog and it's been really fun. You're really like a warrior right now. But yeah, it was an absolute pleasure to be on this. And thank you so much for inviting me and for letting me ramble about things. Hopefully I said something that
I loved the rambles.
Coherent.
Loved the rambles. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I was born Jewish. I got a Hebrew name and I had my bat mitzvah. I fasted on Yom Kippur since I was 11 just to prove that I could. I spin a dreidel and eat gelt each Hanukkah. I've broken the middle matzah on Pesach, all since I was a child. But I really didn't appreciate it, I just kind of went through the motions because that's what I was used to. It wasn't until I grew up that I realized how much pride there was worth having in my identity, how much Judaism is worth celebrating. Nellie's story struck me so deeply because while I was taking the Judaism I was born with for granted, Nellie was studying with so much excitement to join it. And there's something about that I'm so struck by. Sometimes you don't really appreciate what you have when you've always had it. But to somebody joining, Judaism is exciting, romantic even. An ancient people preserved over millennia, upholding the same traditions that our ancestors fought for, and even died for, to keep alive. Isn't there so much poetry in that? So maybe I didn't appreciate my Judaism nearly enough as I should have, once. but I surely appreciate it now. I recognize the magic that Nellie found in it, and I want to celebrate it just like she does. And this, my friends, is where we'll leave you for today's episode of Nice Jewish Girls. Hopefully a bit smarter and a bit more inspired. Let us know your thoughts and email us at podcasts@jewishnunpacked.com. Join us next week when we'll be speaking with Director of Community Engagement for the ADL, Carly Pildes. Nice Jewish Girls is a production of Unpacked, a division of Open Door Media. Rivki Stern is our producer, and I am your host, Julia Jassy. Check out JewishUnpacked.com for everything Unpacked related, and subscribe to our other podcasts. And don't forget to follow Unpacked at all of the social media places, like TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Just look for @JewishUnpacked. Talk to you later, ladies.